know you have a lot of experience with meditation, and what people who meditate often that I've seen don't tend to like psychedelics. So I'm curious if there is a crossover for you.
Yeah. So my perspective on psychedelics is kind of like multi-layered. So let's start with scientifically. So psychedelics are a tool that human beings have used as part of spiritual practice and healing for thousands of years. I think from a science perspective, we are seeing more and more research about the potential positive effects of psychedelics. So as a scientist, as a psychiatrist, you follow the research. If science says it's good, if outcomes are good, then it's good. A couple things that people don't understand is that psychedelics are kind of like playing with fire. So we have, there's these studies that show that it helps with things like PTSD, and we can get into how that works. It's really fascinating. So there's studies that show that it is potentially beneficial. Now, the tricky thing there is that usually those studies are done in conjunction with psychotherapy and in highly controlled environments. So you do some amount of psychotherapy, you get stabilized, and then you use psychedelics. And even if you look at the spiritual traditions, you have someone like a shaman who's very well versed in it, and it's not for everybody. So it's a tool that can be used to temporarily attain higher states of consciousness. They'll also do things like shut off your default mode network, which is the sense of self.
Yeah.
And when people are suicidal, by the way, the default mode network is actually hyperactive. So all they're thinking about is themselves.
Yeah.
If someone says, hey, I can't make it today, you don't think, oh, this person is busy. You think this person doesn't want to see me. So when someone is depressed, all of the thoughts come back to you. My family would be better off without me. I don't deserve to be here. I'm suffering. And
as we described before, because we've used you to mean a number of things, a very limited idea.
Yeah, so
of you.
ahamkara, for sure.
Yeah.
So not the true self,
Yes.
but like they just get stuck thinking about themselves. And so what psychedelics will help people do is break down that kind of barrier of self. And so they're not stuck thinking about themselves all the time. And that's specifically how ketamine works, by the way, because it's a dissociative agent. So you kind of dissociate, and that can be healthy. But the studies on psychedelics show that, they're done in highly controlled environments that are safe. There are also studies that show that psychedelics can both heal PTSD and cause PTSD. So I've worked with tons of people.
Both.
So I've worked with tons of people, and you don't hear about these other people that will develop permanent, or semi-permanent mental illnesses based on psychedelic trips. So the really scary thing is that a lot of people who hear, okay, psychedelics can heal me, will do psychedelics when they are hurting. And that can be one of the worst times.
Yeah.
So if you're in an acute mental illness, if you're in a depressive episode, manic episode, if you're in a really dark place, the psychedelic you'll lose control of. And then it can actually be damaging. So I think I'm cautiously optimistic. I was sort of against them, I would say 5 to 7 years ago. But if we're really being scientific, then we have to follow what the evidence says. And that's kind of the direction that I'm moving in. So I'm cautiously optimistic. From a spirituality perspective, it's a whole different ballgame. So when you say that you were terrified of the ego shattering, what I would say psychedelics is it's taking a helicopter to 20,000 feet.
Yeah.
The problem, though, is that you can't go above that. You can't really hang out there too long, and you don't control where you go when you use psychedelics.
Well, I would distinguish between the different. So MDMA is much more like, I'm going to take this Fisher-Price helicopter up and have a nice little time. And the one that I'm thinking of is helicopter, rocket ship. No, absolutely no control. You're going and you're getting... You sit back and receive at this point.
Well said. And we can talk about, I'm using one term, but even... peyote, ayahuasca, DMT,
Why it can be wildly
MDMA, psilocybin, ketamine, ibogaine. Each of these has discrete neuroscientific effects and even discrete spiritual effects. So I think the basic problem with psychedelics is that you're not trained. So the difference between psychedelics and meditation, and let's remember, by the way, that psychedelics can't create something new. All they can do, these are chemical substances that activate your brain in new ways. They can't actually lay any new architecture. So the reason that opioid medication can reduce our pain is because we have endogenous opioids and endogenous opioid receptors. So everything that psychedelics can do, I suspect, can be endogenous. We have all the architecture, right? It's just activation, which I think a lot of people miss out on. So the thing about meditation is that when you meditate, you're trained. This is the case of a hiker going up to 20,000 feet. So you start at 1,000, start at 2,000, start at 3,000. So you can handle the experience way better. And then the other cool thing is that you can actually go above 20,000 feet. Now, I haven't done psychedelics. You could argue that psychedelics can take you all the way to the top. I don't believe that. And when I've worked with very, very veteran meditators who have done psychedelics, what I oftentimes find is they will sort of agree with me. And the states of samadhi through meditation, I think, are different. And this is where it's super hard to describe because I haven't done psychedelics. But
I mean, psychedelics defy language as well.
Yeah.
Especially the more intense ones.
So when I've done certain, I do a lot of like third eye practices and stuff like that. It's kind of weird, but like when I say like, okay, like I've seen into my past lives, for example, everyone thinks that that's like something like, oh, wow. Like, so you have memories, right? Of like what you ate. The only difference is I just have memories that are just not of this life. And it's not anything special or anything profound or anything weird. I just remember stuff that's never happened to me.
And what do you feel a distinguished sense of knowing? Because even in this life, we can have fabricated memories and, that people imagine things that didn't happen or see things that didn't happen. What do you feel a grounded sense of like, of a reality to this that corresponds to a year in human history where there was some continuation of you? And
100%. So this is also where when you meditate a lot, you start to study the different experiences that you have. So imagination is different from experience.
Yes.
Imagining getting laid and getting laid are like night and day.
This is one of the things that bothers me about NLP practitioners. Like the brain cannot tell the difference between something that is intensely imagined. And I understand the purpose of what they'll talk about when you're visualizing success and those sorts of things. But there is a difference between reality and imagination.
Yeah, that's because so NLP is very functional and it can help people, but it's like scientifically pretty hogwash, honestly. So it's a lot of extrapolations. The real studies behind it are kind of BS.
Yeah.
But I think what they've sort of what they've stumbled upon is stuff that is useful in activating things in human beings that will create positive behavioral outcomes. But I think their scientific mechanisms just aren't very good, at least based on last time I checked the research.
Got it. Well, didn't mean to throw you off there. So difference between reality of getting laid
100%.